Delivery Agreement application. We are recording this webinar and will make it available to you afterwards. We will provide information through the Workforce listserv on how to access the recording once it is available.
There you go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Fong Huynh, Program Administrator for Workforce Education at the State Board, and I am pleased to be joined by Program Assistant Dylan Jillick, Contract Specialist Michelle Rockwell, and Policy Research Associate Travis Delaney. Also in the room with us this morning is Policy Associate Erin Frazier. The SBCT staff will now briefly introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dylan Jillick. I'm a program assistant at the board. I will be able to assist you with all things OGMS related, so logging in, creating and editing your application, etc. I can also field OBIS technical help questions as well once you get to that point of the year.
Hi, I'm Michelle Rockwell, a contract specialist here at SBCTC. Among other duties, I review all of your grant budgets and your budget revision requests throughout the year. I'm also one of the time and effort experts here at the State Board, so feel free to send questions on either topic my way.
Good morning. I'm Travis Delaney. I'm a Policy Research Associate here at the State Board, and I work with the Policy Associates to collect and help them with their data questions and concerns.
We welcome you to ask questions during the designated Q&A sessions. Please reach out to SBCTC staff after the webinar if you have further questions and concerns, or if your questions are related to your individual circumstances. Remember to contact us early on in the application process so you don't miss the application deadline. Our contact information is at the end of this slide deck, and we will be sending out this slide deck once it's finalized to the Workforce listserv. Today we'll be discussing this year's Workforce Delivery Agreement application, hoping to provide you with assistance in accessing it in OGMS, completing the application, and recognizing key fiscal terms, categories, and policies. The Workforce Delivery Agreement application requires you as a workforce provider to specify the training and support services will deliver in fiscal year 20, which covers July 2019 through June 2020. We highly encourage you to work with your local planning area partners, that is your LPA partners, throughout the application process. These partners should include DSHS, Employment Security Department, Department of Commerce contractors, and other LPA members. Work with your partners to gather input on needed training and support services in your area. They will also be instrumental in helping you develop an inventory of support services provided in the community, which you can leverage towards supporting workforce students. You will also need to include this inventory in the matrices document, and I will show you the specific area of the application when we go over the matrices in a little bit. This year's grant application looks a lot like last year's application, which has been streamlined from past versions to be much simpler and easier for the applicant to manage. The application still requires you to be intentional and descriptive with your responses. We review every page of every application. We will note any discrepancies, omissions, errors, etc., and contact you via OGMS for additional information or requested changes. When you access your application in OGMS, make sure to complete all parts of the application before submitting to the State Board. This means filling out all the necessary sections that are embedded in OGMS and also uploading the attachments we need in an acceptable format. These attachments include the insurances and matrices, which we will show you later on. Allow yourself plenty of time to work on all parts of the application, as certain documents require signatures from your institution's representatives and information about your program mix and community resources. I'm going to pause for a moment because I see a couple of comments saying, asking if there is sound. So I'm going to do another sound check. If you can hear me, please type in the chat box that we have sound on our end. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for typing in. Our live captioner also is able to type what we're saying, so there is sound. If, for those who don't have sound right now, they can access the recording at a later time. Okay, so let's move on. As you know, the application was released last Thursday, March 14th. The application closes on Thursday, April 11th at 11:55 p.m. State Board staff will be available to assist until 4 p.m. on that day, April 11th. Please reach out early for questions and concerns so you don't have to face time crunches at the very end. Between mid-April and mid-June, we will be reading every page of every application and providing feedback through OGMS. You can expect to hear from us with feedback sometime in May, so April might be a little early to hear back from us. Please make sure you or a designated staff member will be available throughout this period to answer our questions and complete any revisions we might need. We anticipate that all applicants will be notified of their approval status by late June, and the grant cycle will begin on July 1st, 2019. So now to get into the logistics, I'll turn it over to Dylan, who will discuss some of the technical aspects of the application in OGMS.
Thanks, Lynn. So we'll now address some frequently asked questions about the Online Grant Management System, or OGMS, which is located at ogms.sbctc.edu. So we will also be walking through the website. I'll walk through the website after I go through this slide. So you'll apply for the grant in OGMS. If you don't have an account, you'll need to contact your college's OGMS security contact. They will create you an account. SBCTC staff cannot create OGMS accounts for college faculty and staff. You can find the list of security contacts in OGMS on the Security Contacts tab in OGMS. If you already have an OGMS account, you still need to contact your OGMS security contact for access to the 2019-20 WorkFirst grant. Access from FY19 does not carry over to this year's application. Should you have questions about how to apply for the grant in OGMS or have other OGMS-related questions, please see the user manual under the How To tab in OGMS first. Links are available in the slide, which we'll make available on the SBCTC website after this webinar concludes. So most frequently asked OGMS questions will be answered in the user manual. If your question is not addressed in the manual, start by contacting your organization's OGMS security contact. And if your security contact cannot help, please contact me, Dylan Jillick, at the State Board via email at djillick@sbctc.edu, or my number is 360-704-1021. So we are going to quickly go into the OGMS test site. So this is just for your information. This is our test site. It might look a little bit different from what you have on your end, but it will replicate generally what you are seeing in OGMS. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. So, one second. So this is where you're going to find the security contacts, this tab up here on the upper part of the screen, right in the middle. There'll be an email for your school. The easiest way to find your school is going to be to Control F and type in your school's name. And then this is where you're going to find the user manual. It's a PDF you'll be able to find there. Should you need any contact information for SBCTC, that'll be on this tab. Okay. I'm going to log off again just to show you guys how to retrieve your password should you need to. If you've forgotten your OGMS username and password, you can contact your OGMS security contact for your username. They probably won't have your password, but you can use the Retrieve My Password feature on the login screen to have OGMS email your password to you. It should email your password to you about 30 seconds after you request it. If you don't receive the email in about 2 minutes, check your spam or junk email folder. If it's not there, double check with your security contact to make sure the email address associated with your OGMS user account is correct. As schools update email addresses, OGMS security contacts don't always remember to update user accounts at their college. So we'll now log in. So you can see at the bottom down here, that's the Retrieve My Password button if you need to use it. So once you have access to the FY20 application, you can create a new grant application in the Available Grants section of OGMS. So that's down at the bottom of the page here, Available Grants. After you log in, you'll see a list of grant applications you have access to near the top of your screen. A little farther down, you'll see available grants that you can create a new application for. Locate the Work First grant, and that may be the only one you can see, and click the Create New Application button. So these buttons over here. We're not going to create a new one right now because we already have one in progress. Only go through that process once, only create an application once. After you create your application, the grant application will be in the FY20 screen of OGMS. Because we're currently in FY19, OGMS will show you FY19 grants by default. These are all FY19 grants. To access FY20, you'll have to click into the FY20 screens to find your in-process application. So I'm going to do that now. All these numbers down here represent fiscal year. I'm going to click the 20 button. And here are the grants for FY20. If you don't see the application anywhere, contact your college's OGMS security contact. And just FYI, OGMS has a security feature where after 20 minutes of inactivity, OGMS will log you out. The site only counts clicking the Save button and clicking from one screen to another as activity. Typing doesn't count as activity, and neither does clicking check boxes or radio buttons. The good news is that at the 15-minute mark, OGMS has a pop-up window that comes up and lets you know that you need to save or you'll be logged out and lose all the work you've done since you've last saved. But FYI, depending on your browser settings, your browser may block the pop-up window. So just make sure to save frequently. And we're going to see that pop-up button a couple of times through this webinar, so you'll experience it. So now that you know how to log into OGMS and find the application, let's walk through sections of the application. So I'm going to access you can see the status of your applications over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Our Work First grant application is in process, and we're going to go ahead and click that Edit button. So the first section that you see when you log in is the Applicant Info screen. It's the Applicant Info tab over here on the far left of the screen. This is where you enter your contact info. Both contacts listed here will get emails from OGMS, but only the first contact listed will get the official award email from OBIS. So please be sure that the person listed first is the person who will be the main grant contact all year long should the grant get funded. It's entirely possible that your college will require you to put someone from the grants office in either the primary or secondary contact field. Please check in with them about this. Also, be very careful when entering your email address. If you have a typo in your email address, you won't get the automated emails from OGMS. These are the emails that tell you if your application has been returned and needs modifications and other pertinent things. Please make sure to add OGMS to your contact list as a safe sender so you can receive our notifications. And the next section, in your application, you'll see a link off to the right side of your screen. This is the Grant Info section of the application, and is where you're going to find the grant guidelines and grant fiscal guidelines documents. So please visit that link and read through the documents to get the scoop on what's allowed in these grants, who to contact for info, timeline, deadlines, etc. Clicking on this Grant Info tab opens another screen, so to get back to your application, you'll need to close out the window or tab, depending on your browser, and select the window you are working in. So I'm going to go to that page, back to the Grant Info page. I'm going to open up the grant guidelines now, and Lynn will walk us through several items of note and changes for fiscal year 20. So it's downloading it as a PDF. Okay, that's good. And there you go.
Thank you, Dylan. So now let's look at grant guidelines for fiscal year 20. So you'll notice that the majority of it is very familiar, and I'm going to just take you through some sections that will be very helpful for you as you fill out your application, and also I'll note some slight modifications we've made to the language. Okay.
If you click there's like a thing that can make it easier for you to navigate if you want me to. There. So that will show you the page numbers.
Okay, first let's go to page 10. And by page 10, I meant page 9 or page 8. Okay, actually, it's page 8. This is the approved activities for SBCTC providers. So this is not a change. I just wanted to draw your attention to this area. This section will help you identify the proper activity names and corresponding component codes to describe your workforce activities. You will see these terms mentioned throughout the grant application, including in the budget narrative, and the matrices. So if you've already seen the guidelines before, these will be very familiar to you. Okay, next I will cover some clarifications we have made to the grant guidelines for fiscal year 20. So on page 10, for students using the VE extension, we have added language to specify that their extended academic plan must include the student's anticipated academic quarter of completion and be updated quarterly and as circumstances change. So you'll be able to see that in this bullet point here. Okay, next on page 12, under funding policies, please note that we have taken out language regarding previously earned performance funds. Remember that you are required to fully expend all Workforce performance funds by the end of our current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 19. That's why this section no longer mentions the Workforce performance funds. Okay, moving on to page 15. In the Workforce Work-Study section, we have added some language to clarify what documenting Workforce Work-Study should include. Workforce Work-Study placement must be documented in the student's file on a quarterly basis showing, at minimum, the employment dates, the student's work site placement, their hourly wage, and the number of regularly scheduled hours of work per week. So many of you are probably already doing this, and if you just take a copy from your HR office or your business office that has this minimum information, that'll work fine. And you can see that in this section of the narrative. Okay, and then moving on to page 19. Under the student files section, we have added language to clarify two areas: academic plans and alternate attendance forms. First, we have given a more specific definition for academic plans. An academic plan must identify long-term academic goals and intermediate steps and sequences to reach those goals. Further, academic plans must be updated quarterly and as circumstances change. This will help us just demonstrate that students are making progress in their plan. Second, all alternate weekly attendance forms, which means any form other than the standard DSHS weekly attendance sheet, must be submitted to the SBCTC Workforce Program Administrator on an annual basis for written approval before it can be used. So you are aware of this requirement. We did go over this requirement in a previous quarterly meeting, and now it is incorporated into the guidelines. I have attached a document in the grant info section of OGMS that helps you understand the minimum requirements for an alternate weekly attendance form. Please compare your alternate form with the list to see if you have included all of the required elements. If you plan on using an alternate attendance form in fiscal year 20, meaning any form other than the standard DSHS weekly attendance sheet, please submit your alternate form with your grant application for written approval. You can upload your alternate attendance form in OGMS as an attachment. If you have questions about your Workforce attendance form or need assistance, please do contact me after this webinar. Okay, the next section I wanted to look at together are the appendices. Okay. As you'll notice, Appendix A includes the revamped data security requirements. These are the updated security requirements DSHS introduced in fiscal year 19, so you have already seen them. These requirements have become standard for all grants that go through DSHS. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to Appendix B. As you know, the Workforce Grant Assurances require your institution to develop and maintain a local policy and procedure manual. When there is staff absence or turnover, this manual will be essential in ensuring all grant requirements continue to be met and program services continue without interruption. The table of contents in Appendix B is meant to help you develop local content for your manual and gives you an idea of the areas and tasks that require step-by-step instructions. Although I have highlighted certain areas of the grant guidelines, please do read through the full guidelines so you understand all grant requirements. The SBCTC's grant and fiscal guidelines and the DSHS handbook may be updated throughout the fiscal year to incorporate program and policy changes. I will do my best to notify you when that happens, but it is ultimately your responsibility to read all documents and stay updated on grant and program requirements. There is one more thing I wanted to show you in the guidelines. Deadlines and milestones. I covered the timeline earlier, but would like to reiterate that applications are due on April 11th. We will provide feedback and ask for revisions between mid-April and mid-June. Your grant applications must be what we call substantially approvable by July 1st, 2019, when the grant cycle officially begins.
Okay, so really quickly, just going to go over the other documents that you can find on the grant information page. So we've also included the fiscal guidelines. We've got the planning numbers, we've got the matrices, and the minimum requirements for weekly attendance form that Lynn mentioned. We don't need to open, do we need to open any of these?
Yeah, so I'll explain the matrices and weekly attendance form first, so let's open the matrices.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll notice that when you click on that link, it'll download a document for you to work on. For the matrices, please fill out this form completely to show the programs and support services you plan to offer in fiscal year 20. Please enter all information within the cells of the worksheet and do not insert hyperlinks to web pages since we review the matrices in printed form. So we're not going to open up hyperlinks. Please write everything you need to within the cells. You will notice this year's form is locked and you are only able to edit certain fields. We lock the instructions and examples so you do not accidentally delete that content. Please add your content to areas that are open for edit. You are able to add additional rows in each section as needed. To add another row, go to the last column and use the right-click menu to select Insert Row below. And there you'll see another row has been added. You will see sections of the matrices titled Adult Basic Education, Vocational Education, and Life Skills. This is where you list your workforce activities. Please only list academic programs and general options. You do not need to list the individual courses under those options. We do not want you to do more work than what is necessary. So, for example, you can list culinary arts, but do not list culinary 145. If you do not offer programs or services for a particular category, just go ahead and type NA for not applicable in that section. We have provided examples throughout the matrices to help you understand what we are looking for when we review your matrices. Please remember that workforce approvable activities and their component codes are explained in detail in our workforce grant guidelines, that section that I showed you called Approved Activities for SBCTC Providers. And then towards the bottom of the matrices, the final section is called Retention and Support Services. So in this section, you will identify the retention and support services you will offer in fiscal year 20. These services include what your workforce program will provide, but it should also reflect the services available through your institution and through external providers such as community-based organizations. Please do work with your LPA partners to develop this inventory of resources so it is complete and representative for your local area. Remember, we cannot consider your fiscal year 20 grant application if this document is not completed in its entirety, so please be thorough and accurate. All right, back to the grant info page. This is where you will find the minimum requirements list for alternate weekly attendance forms. Remember that any alternate attendance form must meet these minimum requirements. You are required to submit your alternate attendance form to the SBCTC for written approval before you can use your alternate form in fiscal year 20. If you are using anything other than the standard DSHS weekly attendance form, please submit that alternate form in OGMS as part of your grant application. If you use the standard DSHS attendance form, you do not have to do this part. Okay, next, I will speak more on the planning numbers for fiscal year 20. Okay, as you all know, the State Board uses a funding formula for WorkFirst to award grant funds based on expected program need and past performance. There's a document under the grant information page in OGMS titled Fiscal Year 20 WFDA Planning Numbers, where you can view the planning amount for each institution. Keep in mind that the performance measures have been slightly adapted for our WorkFirst CBOs since their operations and program mixes cannot be directly compared to our college WorkFirst programs. We have communicated these adaptations with our CBOs and just want to reiterate that the planning numbers you see for colleges are not directly comparable to the planning numbers you see for CBOs. But for all grant applicants, which includes colleges and CBOs, please know that you are not required to apply for your full planning amount. We will continue to have quarterly funding surveys in fiscal year 20, so you are able to request additional funds as needed throughout the year. The fall funding survey will be your first opportunity to request funds, or to request to return funds. We will conduct this funding survey in late August. We always advise you to return unneeded funds as early as possible in the fiscal year so we can redistribute funds to areas of need in the system. But please do keep in mind that you do not have to apply for your full planning amount. If you want to apply for a lower amount than what is shown on the planning numbers document, please let us know at least 1 week before the grant application is due so we can update your amount in OGMS. This way we can start the fiscal year with a realistic distribution to best meet system needs. It's also important to keep in mind that these planning numbers are subject to change. We hope to receive our fiscal year contract with DSHS sometime in July. If there is a change to our total grant amount, we will revise grant amounts and proceed with budget revisions in in OBIS. We will definitely let the system know if this happens. And additionally, we have received earmarked WorkFirst Workstudy funds from the legislature since fiscal year 17. If we receive earmarked funds from the legislature again for fiscal year 20, we will release a WorkFirst Workstudy funding survey in the summer for all colleges to request additional work-based learning funds. However, there is no guarantee we will receive these earmarked funds, so please plan your WorkFirst budget around this possibility.
Question in the chat.
All right. So now I would like to reintroduce you to Travis Delaney, who is a Policy Research Associate at the State Board. He led efforts in pulling the data we needed for this year's planning numbers. At the same time, Travis put in tremendous work to improve the quality and transparency of the data we use to implement the WorkFirst funding formula.
Thank you, Lynn. It's my pleasure to be here with you all today. I'd like to go over some changes in how the data for the FY20 planning numbers was generated, how it's used in the formula, and how you can help us ensure that we're capturing all the success that your students experience as they progress through your programs to completion and eventually employment. As a reminder, the funding model is based on the following categories: enrollment, 50%, transitions, 10%, progression, 10%, completions, 20%, and employment, 10%. These categories have not changed, with the exception of the CBO structure Lynn mentioned earlier. However, the data that feeds these categories has been upgraded. In the past, data going into the Work First funding formula came directly from the Student Achievement Initiative database. This made the most sense, as these categories closely mirror the ones in SAI. However, SBCTC staff in late 2018 noted that SAI is reviewed and updated every 5 years based on priorities for the system as a whole, which may not align with the specific needs of Work First. Therefore, to ensure Work First funds are allocated based on outcomes specific to Work First policy considerations, SBCTC staff have designed a data set that still aligns with SAI outcomes, but is tailor-made for the Work First funding formula. The criteria for this data set can be updated or changed as needed outside the SAI review process, allowing for better customization and transparency for Work First stakeholders. I'd like to briefly describe the parameters behind this data. For enrollment, the criteria behind enrollment have not changed since the FY19 planning numbers. This is a simple, unduplicated headcount over the course of the most recently available academic year. In this case, that's 2017-2018. Transitions. A student is counted as transitioned if the student completed 6 college-level credits in the most recently available academic year, 2017-18, after they took 1, their last pre-college course, or 2, were a federally reportable basic education student in the last 2 years, which would be 2016-17 or 2017-18. This measure includes basic education students from Tacoma Community House and Literacy Source. Progression. Students at community and technical colleges appear in the progression measure if they completed their first 15 and 30 college-level credits in the most recently available academic year, which would be 2017-18. For completions, the data set counts the number of students who complete a certificate greater than 20 credits or a degree within the most recently available academic year, again, 2017-18. Employment, a student will appear in the employment metric if they exited Work First in the spring 2016-17 or summer through winter 2017-18 quarters and were found in an unemployment insurance covered job in the second or fourth quarter after exiting college or a CBL. Once we have the data, we enter it into the formula comparing the outcomes of colleges and organizations. So the planning numbers are based on performance relative to your peers, not year-over-year performance. This data relies on proper coding and valid identifiers, so it's important that student data is reported accurately and completely. As an example, if we don't have an accurate and consistent identifier, we can't see whether the student later goes on to gain employment, and the student will not count in the employment metric of the funding formula.
Remember that all this data originates from your institution. Therefore, it is important for you to work with your campus staff to verify student data by the MIS run dates. If you are ever concerned, you can also reach out to the State Board's Data Services team to ensure the data we receive from your institution is valid. Thank you, Travis, for elaborating on our methodology and how data is used in the funding formula. We will cover just one more area of the grant application in OGMS and then stop to take your questions.
Okay, so we're going to head back into OGMS. Thank you, Lynn. The Work First grant has a specific assurance, which you can find in a separate tab. I'm going to go back to OGMS, and here's the pop-up that's going to come up if you don't save or do activity frequently. So the separate tab is called the Assurances tab. You will need to click on the 2019-20 Assurances document. This will open another window where you can print or download the Assurances document for completion and proper signature. So we're going to log back in here. Click on that Assurances tab. And here it's showing us the assurances. So your computer may open it up as another tab or as a PDF, depending on how your browser settings are set. So this will need to be uploaded as an attachment to consider your application complete. You'll upload this in the attachments section, which is the same place you upload your matrices document. And also you need to type agree and electronically sign here. I'm going to show you the attachments tab, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So you'll upload the assurances and any other required attachments in the attachments tab. And then just to attach anything, you hit the choose file button here. You find the appropriate document that you wish to upload, then click the upload attachment button. So if you've chosen the wrong file, you can simply hit this reset button over here to remove your file. You can't delete files once they've been uploaded. Don't worry, we'll simply consider the most recently uploaded file as the file you intended to upload, or you can email us and let us know which file you mean for us to use. Okay, and that's it for attachments and assurances.
Okay, so we are roughly halfway through our presentation today. In the following sections, we will cover additional OGMS information, your budget narrative, and grant and fiscal accountability. But before that, are there any questions on the content covered thus far? Remember, this webinar is being recorded, so please ask questions that are applicable to the group as a whole, and we are happy to answer questions specific to your individual circumstances offline following this webinar. So I do see a couple of questions already in the chat box, so we can look at those first. So Fabiola asks, does the policy need to be submitted with the grant application? Fabiola, I'm assuming this means the local policy and procedure manual? And if that's what you mean, then no. You do not have to submit your manual with your grant application. It is something that is useful for your program at your local level. So if there's ever a change in staffing, which can occur at any time, it would be instrumental to have this manual. We also do look at the manual when we come out for monitoring visits. So that's at the point that we would do a review of it. Okay, and then the next question we have is asking us to clarify about work first, work study, and the earmarked amount. So in past fiscal years, we do have an earmarked amount for each institution because as a system, we must ensure that we expend at least $1.5 million in work first, work study funds. The legislature earmarked that amount so that we could build capacity for work first, work study programs on our campuses. And that's why we have individual earmarked amounts to ensure that we spend at least $1.5 million as a system. So if we do receive earmarked funds again for work first, work study, we will continue to do it in a similar way where we have the funding survey in the summer, and then we will determine earmarked amounts for each institution for fiscal year 20. Okay, so the next question is about student files. Are the academic plans the same as the education and training plans in EJAS? Thank you, Dina, for your question. The academic plans I mentioned are under the student file section of the grant guidelines. Student files in that section means the physical student folders that you keep for your students at your, on your campus. It is different from the education and training plan in EJAS. So they are two separate things, and they are both necessary. So we'll just wait a moment to see if you have other questions before we move on. Okay, so Peninsula College has a question about budgeting for work first, work study. Should we budget work first, work study in our grant from our planning numbers just in case the funds aren't earmarked this year? The answer is yes, you should budget with that possibility in mind that we won't receive earmarked funds. Nothing so far indicates that we will not, but it's also not a guarantee. So in your budget, please do budget staff, salary and benefits, but also student wages, because you may not receive additional funds to begin the fiscal year to support those student wages right away. So short answer is yes, please use in your planning numbers, please allocate some to student wages. Okay, so don't worry, if you, here's another question. Can we adjust our numbers if the workforce work-study funds come? So if we do receive earmarked workforce work-study funds from the legislature, this will be additional funds that you can use to build capacity for your workforce work-study program. So the amount that you have budgeted in your grant application, we add that amount to any additional funds awarded for the workforce work-study earmarked funds. We add those two amounts together, and that becomes your earmarked amount for the fiscal year. So just keep that in mind, and throughout the year, you are able to do budget revisions, but you cannot decrease your work-based learning amount below your earmark, except through a funding survey if we allow it. So it would require approval. There was a question about, can you do the application? Can you apply for your workforce grant for under the amount awarded? So I think this is referring to applying for an amount lower than your planning number. And the answer is yes. If you think the planning number does not fit your circumstances and you would like to apply for a lower amount, just let us know at least 1 week before the grant is due, so by early April, and we will adjust the amount in OGMS for you to apply for a lower amount. Okay, thank you for your questions so far. There is going to be another Q&A session for us towards the end of the presentation. So if you have unanswered questions right now, please wait for that Q&A session. For now, we will move on and get into more information in OGMS.
Okay, so we're going to get back into OGMS. I'm going to give you information on the content section of the application and how to complete it. Okay, so we have the Contents tab in the middle of the screen or so. I'm going to click into that. You must complete each section. As you can see for Work First, there's Section 1 and Section 2, and mark the Check to Mark as Complete box at the bottom of each section before you can submit an application. So down way at the bottom, got the Check to Mark as Complete box. Be sure to also click the Save button on every screen and no less often than every 20 minutes to prevent from getting timed out and losing any content. You may also choose to write your responses in Word and copy them into the application to ensure that you don't lose any content along the way. Please note that the character limit in OGMS is related to each individual character you type there, while most word processors count the number of words. And you can see the character limit right above the boxes that you're typing into. So once you check a section as complete, the icon in the content section row turns into a check mark. This lets you easily see which sections you still need to complete. You don't have to complete the sections in order, and even if you mark a section as complete, you can still go back and change it, as long as you haven't already submitted your application. Just be sure to click the Save button after you make any changes. I'm going to demonstrate what a completed content section looks like and how to correctly complete one of the tabs. So I've already filled out some of the answers for this, and these aren't actual answers, obviously. So we'll click yes on this radio button, and I'm just gonna type in some gibberish here.
Just to let you know, if you do that for the actual application, we might return it back with feedback.
We might. Okay, so yes, type your answers into the relevant answer box. You are required to answer questions marked with a red asterisk. When you finish your answers for the relevant tab, click the check to mark as complete button down here, all the way at the bottom, and then the save button. Okay, so we're not getting any errors, and this check mark up here on section 1, that's what a completed content section looks like. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Lynn to go over anything she has to highlight in the content section.
All right, thank you, Dylan. So you'll see in the grant application that there are 2 sections under the Contents tab in OGMS. These sections require you to input your answers directly into OGMS, like Dylan had demonstrated. Section 1 covers grant and fiscal accountability, and Section 2 is your budget narrative. So Section 1 you've already seen through Dylan's demonstration, and then here's Section 2 for the grant, the budget narrative. So first, Michelle will explain what Section 1 entails.
Okay, so Section 1 of the grant application is about the grant and fiscal accountability. For those of you that have worked with SBCTC grants for a while, you probably know that a couple of years ago we started adding a grant and fiscal accountability section to federal grants such as WorkFirst. This was based on a federal rule change a couple of years ago that requires SBCTC as a pass-through entity to conduct a risk assessment of each grantee prior to awarding a grant. The questions in Section 1 are one small part of how we get at that risk assessment. This is merely one of the ways that SBCTC determines how much of a risk, if at all, it is for us to award these federal funds to your college or CBO. Be honest and accurate with these answers, but don't stress about the answers impacting your funding. If your answers are really concerning to us, we may want additional explanation, or we may suggest process changes to minimize the level of risk. However, it is extremely unlikely that your funding will be altered because of these answers alone. You'll notice that these questions are the same as you answered last year. Rather than just copying and pasting last year's answers, though, please be sure to do a review and update of them. It's very possible or likely that your processes may have changed or your staff may have changed, which means last year's answers won't be accurate anymore. It's also very important that you collaborate with your college or your CBO's grants office or your budget office or the person that does your grants or your budgets on this section, as some of this section, but not all of it, relates to some of their work and work that you do that intersects with their work.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So I will be speaking about Section 2 now. Section 2 is the budget narrative. This is where you can describe how funds from your grant will be used for specific activities. So I will show you that in OGMS. As you can see in this section, activities include work-based learning and work study, vocational education, internal controls, life skills, basic skills, tracking and monitoring, and finally down here, administration. So the budget narrative must align with your budget, meaning the description you provide in your narrative must justify the exact amount you are budgeting for that activity. OGMS does a good job of auto-linking amounts in your narrative section to the amounts you list in the actual budget section of your grant application, but you can always double check to make sure the amounts have carried over. So I'll go back to the top. In writing your narrative, err on the side of too much detail rather than too little detail. If we do not have enough information, we will contact you via OGMS with a request for more explanation. Michelle will go over the specific activities and budget lines in a little bit, but I would like to provide an example of narrative right now so you can see the level of detail we are asking for. So I'll use the work-based learning and work-first work-study category as my example. I will provide a narrative that justifies the amount I am budgeting for this category. So here you can see that my narrative would read, quarterly work-first work-study award for each student is $2,850 for employment of 19 hours per week, 12 weeks per quarter, with an average wage of $12.50 per hour. 19 work-first work-study student slots this year, which includes 3 students for summer, 6 students for fall, 6 students for winter, and 4 students for spring. Total work-first work-study wages estimated at $54,150 and benefits estimated at $2,500. So that's the amount of detail we're asking for work-first work-study. Some of these other categories don't require as much, but this helps us follow your math and see why the amount is justified. State Board staff will review all parts of the application together in a holistic manner. So make sure your budget narrative, and matrices all tell the same story. For example, if you list life skills offerings in your matrices and indicate that your Work-First grant will fund these activities, we expect your budget and budget narrative to tell the same story. And if there is a discrepancy, we will contact you via OGMS to request an explanation and updates to your application. All right, I'll hand it back over to Michelle for the next section.
So as I said earlier, and this also applies to the budget and your budget narrative, please work very closely with your organization's grants and/or budget office to build your budget and to write your budget narrative. Also, refer to the grant fiscal guidelines, which you can find in the grant info section of OGMS, for examples of budget narrative. Expenses for this federal grant must be necessary and reasonable. As such, we're looking to see that all costs for all activities are reasonable in comparison to the number of Work-First students you're expecting. We also need to make sure salaries are reasonable. That's why we're asking for details with salaries and why it's important for you to give accurate FTE amounts with those salaries. We'll go over that in more detail later in this presentation.
So to build your budget, make sure to use past enrollment and other data to help you plan realistic numbers. If you know there will be staffing changes or cost of living adjustments, take this into account and make sure to reflect these in your budget from the get-go. This is another reason why it's important to work with your grants or budget office during this application process. If you are anticipating these changes, but wait to request additional funds in a funding survey, there is no guarantee we will be able to award additional funds at that time. Of course, there will be changes throughout the year that we cannot anticipate. The quarterly funding surveys will help us adjust the system needs, but building a solid and realistic budget will help you get started on the right foot as we enter fiscal year 20.
Thanks, Lynn. So let's go through budget activities and categories now. This grant has several different activities or lines and several categories or columns. For accounting, tracking, and reporting purposes, it's critical that things be budgeted on the correct budget lines and in the correct budget cells. If you have staff that work on multiple activities, they must be split accordingly. This means if they serve students in 2 or more areas, you must budget them on 2 or more lines. You cannot simply budget them on the line where they do most of their work. The same applies to any expenses. So if you purchase a computer for a staff person working with 2 different types of students, that computer must be budgeted on those same 2 budget lines. So for example, if you have a full-time staff that spends 50% of their time with vocational education students and 50% of their time with basic skills students, you must split their salary and benefits with 50% going on each of those 2 lines. Similarly, if there was a 60-40 split, you'd budget 60% on one line and 40% on the other line. And the same thing if you bought them a computer, it would need to be, split, or any expenses that they use to support their activities. Here's a sample of what your grant budget matrix looks like. You'll see this in the Budget tab of your OGMS application. So you can see the activity or the line names down the left-hand side. The work-based learning line of your budget is where you'll budget work-study expenses and any other expenses that support work-based learning, such as staff to support those and any goods and services that you may have. You'll budget actual work-study salaries and benefits, staff or faculty that support them, and as I said, any other expenses you may have.
Remember that you are only including expenses from your WorkFirst grant, so only expenses for your WorkFirst grant. This means paid work experience should only include WorkFirst Workstudy, which is paid 100% out of your WorkFirst grant. Please do not include state and federal work-study in your grant application, as these activities are not funded through your WorkFirst grant, and that's the same for the matrices as well. Please do not include federal and state work-study on the matrices.
Thanks, Lynn. The vocational education line is where you'll serve students in vocational education, degree completion, pre-employment training, or job skills training. The internal controls is where you'll budget expenses your organization has associated with identifying, documenting, and reporting monthly participation hours for WorkFirst students. Please note that this activity is a requirement of the WorkFirst program, so we expect to see funds budgeted here in amounts relative to the total number of WorkFirst students you have. If you plan to do this work with funding outside of your grant, please let us know that. Though we do not really recommend that you use outside funds for this. We recommend that you use your grant funds to accomplish this work. That's what they're there for. Only include costs for direct services, which means costs associated with working directly with or directly on behalf of specific WorkFirst students. Any oversight of the work or oversight of the program is considered to be administrative and would need to be budgeted on the administrative line. Life skills is where you'll budget any costs associated with life skills. This may include actual life skills instruction or assessment or even curriculum design work. Basic skills is where you'll budget costs associated with the delivery of basic education, including basic education for adults, or BE, high school completion, or HS, English language acquisition, ES, high school equivalency, HS, exam preparation, high school 21 plus programs, which are either HS or BE. For colleges, if your college doesn't waive the $25 basic skills tuition for WorkFirst students, be sure to budget that on this line as tuition. Doesn't get lumped in with any tuition you may have on your vocational education line. You may also fund test fees for high school equivalency tests. We currently use the GED. So as long as you've documented that no other funding exists in your area to cover these fees, be sure that you do research and save documentation on a regular basis that there is no other funding for those test fees. Tracking and monitoring is for IT-related work to develop, maintain, and/or support information technology or computer systems like a database that are used to track and monitor students. This is truly IT work around a system. This is not any work that your staff do with tracking and reporting or monitoring students' actual attendance hours, nor is it any research work or any report writing. It's truly IT related. The administration line is where you can budget up to 15% of your grant total for administrative expenses related to your program. These would include staff time for oversight of programs, grant administrative requirements like grant writing or billing, monitoring budgets or reports, supervision of staff or faculty, and any associated expenses. This is also where you can budget indirect expenses. Indirect expenses cannot exceed 5% of salaries budgeted to your grant and must still fit within that 15% allowable for administration. You can claim indirect on wages paid to work-study students as well as college faculty and staff. Just like your costs have to be on the right budget line, they also have to be in the right budget column or category. Here's that same example of your budget matrix that we saw before. You can see the category or column names across the top. So let's go through the categories now. Salaries and benefits is where you'll budget costs for employees at your organization. This is only for direct employees, not any contractors you may have or any faculty or staff at other colleges. You must identify staff titles, a brief description of their duties as they relate to this grant, some kind of salary breakdown. You can give us an FTE or an FTEF amount, and that stands for full-time equivalent staff or full-time equivalent faculty. You can also give us the percent of their salary funded by this grant or an hourly wage. If you'll pay for faculty from this grant, be sure to prorate their salaries if necessary. What I mean by this is that if you have a class that is only for Work1st students, you can charge 100% of the faculty members' time for that class, as long as you aren't also charging tuition for those students. However, if you have a class that has some Work1st students and some non-Work1st students, you must prorate the amount of the faculty member's salary that you can charge to this grant. Of course, if you charge tuition for those Work1st students, you can't charge the faculty member's time. Page 6 of the Grant Fiscal Guidelines document has examples of how to format narrative answers for salaries. Page 16 and 17 of the Grant Fiscal Guidelines contain details to help you calculate FTE and FTES. Also, don't forget that any position funded in whole or in part by a federal grant, such as Work1st, must complete time and effort reports throughout the grant period. There's a bit on that on page 15 of the Fiscal Guidelines and an entire manual devoted to time and effort that you can find in the How-To section of OGMS. You can also find it on our website just by searching time and effort once you're at SBCTC's website. It's also available in OBIS in the Resources section. Goods and services is where you'll budget items and services you'll fund from these grants. Be sure to tell us what kinds of goods and services you'll purchase. All goods and services purchased must be in support of Work1st programs. It's okay to be a little bit generic in your narrative. For example, you can say you'll purchase classroom instructional materials for life skills instead of naming the exact book that you'll purchase. Or you can say you'll purchase office supplies for internal controls instead of detailing things like file folders, paper clips, staples. However, typing just the words goods and services in your narrative is not enough. If your budget narrative uses the term equipment, be sure to tell us that equipment doesn't meet the definition of capital outlays. We'll discuss that a little more later in the presentation. Please note that any non-consumable goods you purchase must be retained by your organization. Items purchased cannot be given to students. Students may use them and check them out, but the college must ultimately retain them. For example, if you purchase a set of books for your classroom use, you could check them out to students, but not give them to students to keep. You also would budget services here in the goods and services budget cell. High school equivalency, or GED, testing fees are not required student fees, so you wouldn't budget them under tuition books and fees, since that category only includes required fees. Instead, budget GED testing fees in the goods and services category of the basic skills activity or line, if you charge them to your grant. Paying for GED test fees is considered a support service, so there are additional rules regarding that. As we discussed earlier, but this is really important, in your budget narrative, be sure to tell us that you've researched and found that no other funding sources are available to pay for GED testing fees. Document that and keep that on file. Research that on a regular basis because funding sometimes becomes available from other funding sources. Services also include interagency agreements, or your college might call them interlocal agreements, which are defined as contracts between two or more public entities like community and technical colleges. Building rental and utilization is if you have to rent space to accomplish grant objectives. This might be rent at a community building where you offer services related to Work1st. Any rent charged to this grant must be at or below what is considered to be fair market value in your area. In your budget narrative, verify that rent is at or below fair market value, or FMV. Also, keep documentation that backs that statement up on file at your organization. Your grants or business office can help you determine fair market value for your area. Also, the only way you can charge rent of a facility that your college or CBO or your college or CBO foundation owns to this grant is if your college, CBO, or foundation has a policy that rent is charged to every program, not just your Work First programs. If that's the case, be sure to include in your narrative that it is policy to charge rent to all programs, and be sure to keep documentation in your files as well. Travel is the next budget category. It's fairly self-explanatory. Just tell us generally why the travel is required. Is it for meetings with off-site partners, or meetings with students at community locations, or something else? The only reminders I have for you are that all state travel rules must be followed and state travel rates must be used, even if you're a CBO. Your college or CBO might also have internal processes and rules that you have to follow, so be sure to make sure you know what those are as well. Contracts is the next budget category. This is where you'll budget any true contracts your organization has. This might be something like a guest speaker or a contractor for curriculum development. This is also where you'd budget any contracts between a college and a CBO. This is probably not where you'll budget contracts with your faculty. Your college may call them a faculty contract, but they're usually still a direct employee of your college and will be budgeted as salaries instead. Again, this is why it's very important for you to work with your grants and or business office on your budget and budget narrative for this grant application. In your grant narrative, give us a brief description of what the contract is for. Why are you doing this contract? Don't forget that any rules that apply to your organization under this grant must also be passed along to your contractor. For example, you're required to follow state rules and rates for travel. If you contract with someone and will reimburse their travel expenses, you have to make sure they follow all state rules and rates for that travel. Capital outlays is next. The most important thing to remember with capital outlays is they must be approved prior to SBCTC. Your SBCTC must approve your purchase prior to your organization making the purchase. If they're not already in your budget, do a budget revision in OBIS to add them before you make that purchase. And capital outlays are defined as any property or equipment with a useful life in excess of 1 year and a per unit acquisition cost of $5,000 or more. In your budget, we need you to be pretty specific about the capital outlays that will be purchased. You can't put a placeholder in your budget that simply says equipment. We have to know exactly what it is and approve the specific items you'll purchase and before you purchase them. Capital outlay items must typically be considered special purpose items to be eligible for an expense from this grant. General purpose items like furniture with a per unit price of $5,000 are typically not approved. I don't see very many of these in your workforce budget, so chances are good you won't have any capital outlays. If you do and you want, just give us a call before you buy the item, just to double check that it is allowable. We'd still want you to do a budget revision, but because we don't see very many of these and you may or may not actually have a capital outlays purchase, it might save you some time to call us ahead of time and discuss. Tuition, books, and fees is where you'll budget any tuition, books, and any required student fees. A couple of notes on this. In order for you to be able to charge the student fees to this grant, they have to be required. They have to be required of all students, not just Work First students. Books and tuition can be paid from this grant, but funds cannot be given directly to a student to buy their own books or pay their own tuition. The college must pay these directly. The $25 basic skills fee, you often call it a fee, but it truly is considered tuition, so budget that on the tuition category on the basic skills line. Make sure you budget tuition, books, and fees on appropriate budget lines. For example, if you're going to pay tuition for basic skills students, put that on the basic skills line. If you were going to pay tuition for any life skills, that would be on the life skills line. You can't simply budget all your tuition on one line, such as the vocational education line. And again, as we mentioned earlier, note that if your college will charge tuition for a particular class to the Workforce Grant, you can't also charge the faculty teaching that same class to the Workforce Grant. It's one or the other. It's either faculty or the tuition. Indirect is the last category. Your organization can claim up to 5% of salaries and wages, including Workforce student wages, or including work-study wages, but not benefits for staff or the work-study students. So you can charge again, up to 5% of salaries and wages for your staff or your work-study students, but not for their benefits. This is to cover such costs as operation, maintenance, library, and student administrative expenses that cannot clearly be allocated to any individual program. CBOs used to be required to submit a copy of their federal indirect rate in order to take indirect on this grant. Due to changing federal rules, this is no longer a requirement. CBOs can now claim the 5% indirect without having to submit a copy of your federal indirect rate. Any questions that we've covered so far on budget or budget narrative?
And also, just to let you know, we are almost done with the presentation. The final portion of our presentation will be about submitting your grant application and receiving feedback and approval. So as Michelle asked, are there any questions right now? I see there is one question in the chat box. We're gonna take a look at it first.
Yeah, so the question we have is, does travel to SBCTC-sponsored quarterly meetings go under admin, or can it be split based on the staff's work distribution? It's really going to depend on what the meetings are and what the person is getting out of them. If it's an administrative meeting and it's going to talk about, and the person's going to get out, overall oversight of the benefit of going to that is going to help with the overall administration of their program, then it's going to be admin. If it's frontline staff that are going to get information on the various different programs that they support within WorkFirst, you're going to split it however their salary is paid and whatever benefit they're getting out of it. So if it's a staff that supports VE students and basic skills students, and that's what they're going to get out of it, and they're going to apply that directly to their direct work with those students, you're going to split it, 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever percentage of their time is split that way.
Are there other questions right now? We'll just wait another minute to see if a question pops up. You might be typing furiously right now. So we'll give you a moment. Okay, seeing no more questions right now, we will move on. Before we end this webinar, I will ask for final questions, so don't worry, there will be one final check-in. So to move on with some of the final items, here's Dylan.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so one of the more fun parts, I guess, of this whole process is submitting your grant application. Once you've completed every part of the grant application, you can go to the Submit tab of the application in OGMS and submit the application to SBCTC. We're going to just show that quickly. And here again, we've timed out, so we're going to have to log in again. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, it's saying we can't submit because we haven't finished the application yet. But if we had finished all the other tabs, we would be able to type in our name, title, and phone number. And then there would be, you would click the submit button that would appear down here, and then your application will have been submitted to SBCTC. So we get a notification from OGMS that you've submitted, so you don't need to call or email us. Additionally, if you refresh your screen, the status on your end should change from in process to submitted. So right underneath the name of the grant, at the top of the screen, there's your status. So right now we're in process. The OGMS user manual will show you where you can find the status as well. Just a reminder that Up at the very top of the page, under the How To tab, is where you're going to find the user manual. If there aren't any boxes on the screen for you to type your name, title, and phone number, and the Submit button is missing, first check to make sure every section of your application is completed. You've checked to mark each section complete at the bottom of every screen, and each tab has a check mark on it. So these tabs up at the top, once you've finished them, they will have a little check mark showing that you're done. If every tab has a check mark and you still don't have content boxes and a Submit button on the Submit screen, check with your OGMS security contact. It is very likely that person did not set your OGMS permissions adequately for you to be able to submit the grant. This may be an oversight or by design, as different colleges have different protocol on who can actually submit grant applications. And a reminder that the security contacts tab at the top is where you're going to be able to find that person's contact information. Okay, so application feedback and approval. It's possible that a grant application may require minor revisions before FBCTC can approve it for funding. These are often minor budget changes, like an item is allowable but must be moved from one budget category to another. If this is the case, you'll receive an email from OGMS letting you know that you have feedback for your grant. Once you've logged into OGMS, you'll see that your grant status has changed from submitted to follow-up. Any feedback that SBCTC has on applications, including necessary modifications, will be on the Feedback tab of OGMS. That's another tab up here at the top. It's the one all the way on the right at the top. Clicking in. Either Lynn, Michelle, or I will type in instructions on what you need to change. So, to respond to feedback, go to the question number related to your feedback. For example, if the feedback asks you to make a change to question 2.2a, click into the Content section 2 in your application, locate 2.2a, and change the text in the narrative box. Once you've made the changes, be sure to save at the bottom of each applicable content screen, then resubmit your application on the Submit tab. Once your grant has been approved, you'll receive an email notifying you of the new status of your grant, and when you log into OGMS to view your Work First grant, your grant status will have changed to approved. Okay, I'm gonna throw the PowerPoint back on and hand the mic back over to Lynn.
Thank you, Dylan.
Yep.
All right, everyone. So we've reached the end of our presentation. Right now, are there any final questions that you'd like to ask? Any general questions that could apply to everyone? I think there aren't any questions because this seems like a very simple and straightforward process. Okay, so I did see a question pop up. Okay, just a moment as we read the question. All right, so the question that came in is about, is there a requirement to fund work study to any extent that you have in the past? So you are not held to any past earmarked amounts, but we do encourage you to support students in this way because work study, as our data has shown, is beneficial to the student. They have the flexibility to dedicate resources in a way that most supports their family, and it is also very important in the retention and completion for our students. So you are not held to a prior year's earmark, but please do budget funds as you would like to see your work study program grow on your campus and for your program. All right, and the next question is, will we be emailing this PowerPoint out? And the answer is yes. We will finalize it, put it into a PDF form, and distribute it out to you through the Workforce listserv. We would like to finalize this video recording as well, along with the captioning, and everything will come out to you in one message.
And we'll probably have that all finalized, I would say, Wednesday, Thursday of this week or so.
Yes, we'll get working on it very quickly because the more time that you have with all of these resources means more time for you to work on your grant application. So we're very aware of how time sensitive this is. Are there any other questions? All right, seeing none, that's it for OGMS, and that's the fiscal year application in a nutshell. Make sure to review the application materials and fiscal year 20 resources early on so you can contact us with questions and concerns as they arise. And here on this PowerPoint screen, you can see our contact information again. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us during this process. All right, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day. Bye-bye.